Great. Appreciate folks joining. Just by a show of hands, how many people are new to one of these Saturday Zoom sessions? Great. Harold and Dan. Harold, you're up in Toronto. I see that you posted. So it must be much colder there than it is in LA, which is going to be about 90 today.
Yes, we're about 32 degrees
Well,
Fahrenheit.
Love Toronto, don't love the weather. So, and then Dan, you said you were invited by Dave English. So welcome to us. Are you the fellow that's the Cinerama expert?
Actually, motion picture technology in general, also a bit of media in general, audio, video, and everything else, but particularly in film formats. And I've done a fair amount of research on World's Fair film formats, so I will hold any commentary until the end.
Yeah, all the mistakes have to wait till the end. That's great.
Yeah, I had a number of comments on last week's one about Cinerama 360, To the Moon and Beyond, which had a number of things that could be clarified, but that doesn't apply to this particular session.
Great, thanks. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to mute everybody. Let me just mute all button. Bless you. Whoever sneezed. Okay. So I'm going to mute everybody. Basically, for folks that are new, I'm going to do the presentation. There's a function to put questions or whatever in chat. I'm going to try to look at them over at the other laptop over here, but if I don't get to them, I'll get to them at the end. This week is going to be the industrial area for the 1964-65 New York World's Fair. Originally, I intended to try to do the whole industrial area, and then I was mentioning at the beginning, about 1 o'clock in the morning, I said, that's as far as I'm going, so we're going to get up to the House of Good Taste. The industrial area, let me actually get started with some of the pictures here so I can bring them up here. So 1 second. Okay, the industrial area, there we go, was a very large section. You can see it here on the site plan. The reason it became so big is, as mentioned before, Robert Moses had made several mistakes on his international relations, particularly with the Board of International Exhibitions. And a lot of the nations that we're talking about going to be at the fair pulled out because of politics and basically just trouble dealing with Mr. Moses. So he turned to American industry and said, I need your help, come back and help me build this fair. And American industry more than stepped up to the task. So you have this giant area up at the top there. You can see up at the very top, there's a brown area, which no lines in it. That was originally going to be part of the fair, had been used for the 39 World's Fair before the highway was put in. They were hoping to make the fair so successful, they were going to rent out that upper brown spot as well. It ended up becoming a parking lot because they had space left to go. But this is basically the general site plan. I don't remember a particular date on this one, but again, you can see where the industrial area was. If we look at the famous time life map, this gives us a little bit more of an orientation. You had the circle, the fountain up at the top, Fountain of the Planets, also called the Pool of Industry. This had been the Fountain of the Nations for the 39 World's Fair, much more of a long, elongated oval shape. It was reshaped into this circular with a little niche cut out of it for the 64 World's Fair. But you can see around there all sorts of industrial pavilions, the Bell System, Dupont, IBM, all sorts of names of American industry. And we're going to start at the A's and work our way around. Rather than try to go up and down the paths in any sort of real life order, we're going to go in alphabetical order. But we're going to start by jumping on the train and taking a ride out to Flushing Meadows. If you go to my site or a number of other places, you can find that New York really went way out for the World's Fair, bringing these new trains into place. And they had a very catchy jingle. Part of the fun of the World's Fair is the subway special that gets you there. And these trains were really revolutionary. I can remember up to this point in time going on these absolutely antiquated New York subways with hard wicker seats that always seemed absolutely filthy. Now we ended up with these plastic seats, which are much easier to clean. But people came out to the fair in droves by train. The number 7 made it much easier for people to get out there. Didn't have to worry about cars. You get out there and here you are at the Willis Point Boulevard station. And the fair is just entrancingly off to the side there, very close to the world of tomorrow. So people come pouring off the subway in droves, the same subway stop that also would be for Shea Stadium, now Citi Field. our first view of a bunch of happy nuns on their way out there. And people that see pictures of the fair know we're going to see lots and lots of happy nuns throughout the time because they came out in droves. Yeah, this long walkway, still there today, wooden walkway that came over, Shea in the background, and this part of the fleet of subways, cars down below. They were called the Bluebird Cars, very, very popular with people, particularly, as I mentioned, replacing some very old rolling stock up to that point in time. As we walk up, we get a chance to buy our tickets. If you have $2, you're an adult, you're in, $1 for a kid. And they had some discounts for military and others. If you go out there to the site today, that angular building, the roof is still there. And if you look down the ground, you can see the mounting holes where the these poles were, the ticket booths, the turnstiles, all kind of ghostly remnants of the fair. And we come walking up. We're going to go in the main gate, the Gotham gate. This went into the area called Gotham Plaza, but it was the main area for people coming in by subway. They also had a bus station here and parking lots in the area, so it was a very busy area. And we have to remember the sign up above. We're not going to have any parades, congregations, picketing, so everybody behave yourself for the rest of the hour. And we turn in our tickets, we walk into it, and there's Gotham Plaza down below. One of the entrance pylons discussed a week or two back, standing up. RCA must have paid a fortune for this particular piece of property because, as they say, location, location, location is going to be the thing. Right in front of you, everybody coming in this gate, the first thing you see is RCA. We are not going to see RCA today because we're going to go alphabetically, and we'll get to them later. Right down below the entrance pylon is one of the official World's Fair clocks. They were all synchronized to a master clock at the Swiss Pavilion. My uncle Bill was with New York Telephone, and one of the things he did was connect all the clocks to the master clock system. And that's where I first really started getting interested in the fair. Is Uncle Bill would talk about what he had seen at the fair, or hey, they brought in this today, we saw that, crazy buildings, and he was very pessimistic at times if it was all going to be finished on time. He also worked on all the phone booths and basically any telephone things out of the fair, but his talking about it was a big impetus for the interest I've developed in it. We're going to start now with the Leisurama All-Star Properties. This was kind of an interesting situation. It's a very, very hard thing to get a picture of because people looked at it, it looked like a house, they didn't take a picture of it. I had one other very bad picture of it, and then my friend Albert Fisher came up with this particular one. The Leisurama concept was that you could buy an entire house and all of its furnishings at your local Macy's. So you would go into Macy's, look at a catalog and say, yes, give me floor plan number 3. And I want this set of couches, and I want these set of dishes, and here's the toaster that I want. And you could take it all the way down to your toothbrush. And that concept was for new families just starting out. You didn't have to worry about all this stuff. You could just buy it at Macy's. I don't know if you could put it on your credit card or not, but you could buy it at Macy's at a certain date and time.
Your air conditioner is feeding into your top.
The air conditioner is making too much noise? Okay. Hang on. What's that? No. Excuse me 1 second. Carol tells me the air conditioner is making too much noise. I don't hear it myself, so let me just turn it off. I'll be right with you. That's the trouble where it's going to be 90 degrees today. Anyway, we're back. So you could buy this entire home, A to Z, and get it delivered. And it turned out not to be a very good concept because most people, as you're buying a home, probably already have a toaster. They probably already have their toothbrush, that sort of thing. But it was a fad that lasted for a while. There's actually a pretty interesting book about Leisurama that I helped contribute to. And a number of these houses were built, particularly out in the eastern side, the Suffolk area out on Long Island. There's a couple of them. And some of them look very much like they did when they were built back in the '64 era. Others have been greatly changed. This was only here for 1964. It did not attract very many visitors. I don't think anybody actually walked in and bought a house. So in 1965, this facility was used as a USO lounge for visiting servicemen. That wasn't the only impact Macy's had at the World's Fair. Before the fair, they had this giant model at their major store in New York, And they were also one of the pre-sale ticket centers. You could walk in, buy your tickets to the World's Fair, look at this model, and the model ended up getting moved out to the American Express Pavilion. American Express was the official travel company of the World's Fair. They, of course, would be glad to sell you traveler's check or that sort of thing, but they also inside had the model of the fair. And they had a very interesting set of narration that would go and say, give you a virtual tour of the fair and kind of suggest areas that you might want to go and see and where you want to go look as you walk around. It would also, the lights would dim and you would see what the fair would look like at night. So very detailed little model out there. They had to update it at the last minute for some last minute changes that were going to take place at the fair. But it was a great way for people to come in and find out where they were. Down below, you can see kind of a black arrow, you are here, giving people the orientation of where they are. I do have the audio tapes from this. Someday I'll get them up on my site and you can listen as they tell you how to tour the fair. Outside, you had something we'd all like to have, which is a money tree. And they had taken $1 million worth of currency from around the world, encased each of the bills in a piece of plexiglass and attached it to the tree. And they were attached in such a way that they would actually ripple in the wind, move around. You can notice that they're in a metal cage to stop people from going and pruning the tree. Between the seasons of the fair, they actually went up and they did take the $1 million down, safeguard it, and put it back up. Some of the money has made its ways into private collectors' hands. I know that Mitch, a friend of ours, has at least one or maybe two pieces of it. But it was $1 million just temptingly out of reach. Very, very attractive to come back at night and try to help yourself. Going to continue alphabetically. Arlington Hats, this little stand here, was the official hat company for the World's Fair. And from past looks, we can see that they did pretty well selling hats with giant feathers on it. They also sold cowboy hats, hats of every particular type. And in one of their exhibits, they had a thing about the history of felt, which I had never given any particular thought before, but how felt was discovered and manufactured. Since so many of their hats are made out of felt, they had a felt museum and a felt technology exhibit. And back we see Kodak, and we'll get to them as we continue our hike around. Then you had this particular area was the Pan American Highway Gardens, and it's also in we'll get to its 65 incarnation in a second. This was one of those areas that was not leased out in time to put a massive pavilion on it. Someday I have to go back and look at the original site maps and see who was intending to be there, but it didn't come to be. So they ended up putting a garden in there to celebrate the fact that you can now drive from the United States down through Central America and reach South America. It was a pretty area. It wasn't particularly busy. You can see here for a shot, for example, lots of fountains, flags of the nations you would drive through in the way. It's kind of interesting. If you were able to zoom in that gazebo in the center there, you would find that somebody graffitied it. So for everybody that says back in 1964, everybody behaved themselves and it was a perfect world. No, back at that point in time, we still had graffiti artists. But it was an area was a lot of people could walk through. Nobody really stayed there. So in 1965, it became an Avis rent-a-car stand where you could rent these little go-karts. And they were much more popular, as you could see. That's the same area with the same flagpoles, no longer the flags of the nation, since it was no longer dedicated to the members that you would drive through. But you could rent one of these cars, drive around. Unlike the Disneyland Autopia cars, they were not on tracks. Lots of crashes, which I think that people were all enjoying. And I have many pictures of absolutely smashed and broken to pieces cars that are on the side of the track waiting to have 2 or 3 cars taken apart and put back into one. So it was a kind of noisy thing and not real high tech, not real World's Fair worthy sort of thing, but a popular addition for 1965 for an area that had been kind of underutilized in '64. Continuing alphabetically, we're going to get to one of my favorite pavilions, the Bell System. As I mentioned, my uncle worked for the Bell System. Ended up a friend of mine's sister worked at the Bell System Pavilion and was able to get us into the fair many days for free. We were able to get VIP access into the Bell System. And being a technology nut, I was really enamored by it, and maybe that's why 4 years later I ended up going to work for Ma Bell. But a massive pavilion. That tower off to the leftist side was a microwave tower. When I do the presentation on the building and the demolition of the fair, I've got a lot of shots of how they built this tower, put it all together. But this was where all of the communications for the fair ran in and out of that particular tower. It had massive amount of video links so they could do presentations for live television, newscast feeds, that sort of thing. Also brought all the voice and other data in and out of the fair through that particular facility. Down below, they had an entire switching system, one of the brand new electronic switching systems. And this is where all the fair's telephones were served out of all the touch-tone phones. The building, as you can see, pretty much floats in the air on 4 pylons. Again, I'll get more into the details of how they pulled it all off, but it was a very impressive cantilevered structure sitting above the fairgrounds. It was also very impressive at night. You can see they did a really nice job of lighting up the building. The spotlights are not very obtrusive, they're very evenly lit. Somebody was mentioning on Facebook, it had the original Bell System logo. For the folks that are, I think most of us have some gray hair. We probably remember Ma Bell sort of fondly before Judge Green and his dissent decree dismembered Ma Bell and broke it into all the little companies. But the Bell System was your operating system. In New York, for example, you had New York Telephone provided you your dial tone. Western Electric actually made the telephones. AT&T Long Lines, where I worked, was the one that connected you to somebody else in another part of the country. So you had they had all sorts of other things. Bell Labs, where the transistor was invented. Very amazing place to work, I have to say it. And there again is the logo, and down below you can see some of the other companies that were part of the Bell System at the time. So we're going to go and take a ride through the Bell System. You had these moving chairs. When I did my talk about Disney and World's Fairs, I mentioned that if anybody thinks about the Omni movers that we use to move people through the Haunted Mansion and other facilities, this was not lost on the fact that some of the Disney folks that designed that had come back, worked at the World's Fair on the Disney rides, also took rides on the Bell System, and improved it and changed it for larger capacity and more mobility as far as being able to turn from side to side. These are all pretty much facing in one direction. But a couple of these chairs have made it into private collections. Again, Mitch mentioned earlier has one. I think Stephanie does, a couple other folks. But you would get on this chair. If you look on the back of them, there's a little rectangular square and a notch cut out of it. That's because there was a wheel in there that would ride along, and when it hit a certain spot on a track, it would know to lower a pair of headphones down over your head so you could listen to the narration. So she looks like she's all set, going to be having a great day. He doesn't look so sure about how things are going to go on, but they're strapped in with their little safety straps across them, and they're going to be going off into the tunnel here, where you're going to be going in and getting a show, a little bit of concept art, because getting the pictures inside is a little tough. But this was a concept show called From Drumbeat to Telstar, all about how communications were done. And it was a really impressive show. I think it was Hal Holbrook did the narration. You had all sorts of multimedia screens. I forget offhand how many, 60-something 16 millimeter projectors. You had 35 millimeter slides. You had all sorts of things going on. And I could still, I have a terrible singing voice, so I'll not subject you to it. But I still remember the song from it, and I could sing it right now. It's amazing, I think, to stick with you for that long. A great show, particularly on a hot day, and you could go and enjoy it in the air conditioning. When you came out, there was a massive display of Bell System technology and products. This particular one was part of the Western Electric exhibit. In the background, the picture, you can see a typical Western Electric manufacturing facility. And every single telephone that came off the line was subjected to a quality control test. And that's what the woman in brown is doing. She's holding a handset up to a test stand, and it would play sounds through the microphone and then have it come back out through the earpiece. And she was looking at a scope there to tell you whether or not the sound quality was sufficient. They would ring the bells on them to make sure they were loud enough. They actually, this was not just something they did for a gimmick at the World's Fair. They actually tested every single telephone that came out. Hanging above them are some new telephones, a call director off on the left-hand side with the multiple buttons, new wall phones, desk phones. Up in over the lady in blue is a very rare piece of equipment, a car phone from 1964. So all sorts of stuff they had going on. They also would go and show you something new called data speed services, an amazing new technology the Bell system had that would link computer to computer. And, you know, we take all this for so much granted for today. You know, we're all on our computers connected to the computers right now. But back in 1964, you had to teletype. You can see it sitting there with a piece of paper tape hanging out. And the fact that you could go to one of these, talk to another computer, and start pulling data back from a computer at a distance was really something. People were already getting used to the fact you could have a computer in your office, you could type into it and get information back. But the idea that you could put a terminal into your office and not have to have a room full of a mainframe, this was a big thing in '64. This I mentioned something brand new for this point in time, electronic switching system. The World's Fair was one of the first commercial implementations. Beforehand, we used systems of step motors and rotors that make your calls go. So when you dial a 6, something would turn 6 times, connect to something, a 4 would turn. This was a new technology, and it was all done quietly. If you ever walked into an AT&T switch room back in the step system, or some of the crossbar frame system, very noisy. To walk into one of these and it was humming, it was quite a revelation. And all sorts of exhibits, 22 more telephones installed every minute of the working day. Today, I don't know how many numbers that is with cell phones. It's probably a couple hundred per minute. But you would walk through here and they had all sorts of displays explaining how your ear works, how your larynx works. Displays of early telephones from the old candlestick phone on the far right up to the more modern touchtone phones and speaker phones on the left. Here was an exhibit that they would go and put people in a booth and they would have them talk and they could analyze their wave patterns. And it could also show you, using the technology of the woman that's there, how if they dropped out the bass sounds or multiplied the treble, that sort of thing, how they could change voices, and how telephones had to be able to adapt to all the fact that some people are very low, gravelly, raspy voices, other people are real high pattern, and the system had to be able to handle all those without issue. Well, also, now it was getting popular. You could actually make telephone calls across the ocean much easier. You could, in the past, you had to call an operator, and the operator would have to connect you, and you might have to have them call you back in an hour or two to see your connection was ready. Now, with the sections of cable, there's a piece of it lying there on the ground, you could actually direct dial London yourself. So this was a whole thing in here and how they were able to cram multiple voices onto one particular piece of cable, and basically through doing some things with frequency shifts, make much more use of the same piece of wire that we ran across the ocean. Then we get to the ever popular speakerphone, picture phones rather. They would have a contest. You would pick a number out, and you would get picked for booth 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that sort of thing, and you would go in to use one of these picture phones. Early in the morning, you would talk to somebody in another booth, but later in the day, you'd get to talk to somebody at Disneyland because they would put one of these installations out there as well. So she's giving the demonstration of how this is going to work, explaining to people the whole concept of it. And it seems strange today when everybody has FaceTime or something similar on their phone that you had to be instructed how to do a video call. But this is what you had back then. You had a black and white screen. It was a very interesting touch-tone phone for those of us that are geeks. If you look at it, it's a 11-button touch-tone phone. When touch-tone phones were first put out in '64, most of them had 10 buttons. You didn't have the asterisk and the number sign that we use today. They ended up putting an extra button in here for the picture phone circuit. Later, when again I was a phone nut, we had 16-button phones for the Autobahn system used by the military. But this was a great way that you could talk to people on your picture phone. And again, just for the other geeks out there, and I assume there's more than one, the picture phones were very expensive to operate. It required 12 voice circuits tied together in tandem to provide the picture capacity for the video sync. As you can see, it was black and white, very small screen, and it was expensive. I have a brochure somewhere around, but it was about 30 times the price per minute of a voice call. So you did not tend to call, Aunt Sally and say, how are you and Uncle Tom doing? It was tended to be used for business meetings, but even there it was very expensive because you could only see one other person. There was no, Zoom sort of technology, multi screens. There was no way to project it up. So it was bought by a number of companies. Alcoa Aluminum put a big installation in between their plants. A couple others did. And tended to be that most companies did not install these permanently because of the cost. So they installed centers where you could go and rent time at a picture phone facility. So if I was in New York, I could get a picture phone facility at an AT&T office in New York. Somebody could go to one in Chicago. We could look at each other. It did not turn out to be very successful and pretty much died. Now, in 1969, when I went to work for AT&T Long Lines as a summer job, I went into one of our equipment rooms, and lo and behold, one of these phones was still sitting there, not connected. Nobody knew how to use it. I was talking to a guy in our Washington, D.C. office, and he mentioned they had one there. So we spent the better part of the next 2 months on our lunch hours trying to figure out how to make these things work. Kind of surreptitiously took 12 voice lines out of revenue service and resurrected the video link between them. We then had to go find things like, where do we find the 11-button phone, which was great. So we finally were able to get it together. We put it together, and I can remember looking at him in Washington. He looked at me and realized we had nothing more to say. And I kind of showed you why picture phones didn't survive. But I think I may have made one of the last calls on one of these phones ever to go. They later came up with a picture phone 2, larger screen. But it never really took off. But yeah, 1969, the search for an 11-button phone was great fun. They also had a display, really quaint at the time, a copy of every phone book from across the United States. The hostess is down there entertaining one of the Pinkerton guards. But people would actually come in and not believe that they would have a phone book from their hometown, and they would go and find it and find their name in the phone book. And it sounds really stupid, but I can remember being 12 years old, walking and finding the Nassau County, New York white pages, and there was the Cotter family listed. So kind of an interesting display. They also had this chatterbox, the family booth for hands-free phoning. That was on one of the displays inside the pavilion. So you could go in, it was a speakerphone, drop your money in and talk, but this was the only chatterbox per se. What they ended up doing is putting these family phone booths around. They were kind of neat. Again, they were air conditioned. You could walk in, drop a dime in at the time, make your phone call, and you could call your relatives and say, how about the World's Fair? You're not. So there was big plans that these would be real popular at theme parks and all sorts of places around the world. I don't think family phone booths ever came to be other than at the World's Fair. We also had the serpentine phone booths. Clark Kent would have been very disappointed not making his transformation in one of these without being seen, but they were very modern design. Again, one of these is known to exist. After the World's Fair ended, a fellow went out there, was able to blow torch one off at the ground, take it back to his house in Nyack, New York. A fellow named Peter Warner stayed there for years, was finally sold, and Mitch Silverstein and others are working with the Queen's Museum to try to get it restored. We're going to move away from the Bell system. We're going to go over to the Better Living Center. And the Better Living Center is on my list of things on how not to build a World's Fair pavilion. We'll get kind of into that. You can see it's a massive pavilion. And Better Living Center was done as an area for, I'm going to build the building and I'm going to rent the space out to all sorts of other companies that couldn't afford their own space. So it was not any one company, it was many, many companies with lots of displays. This is an early view. If you notice the building, it has the one seal on the side telling you it's the Better Living Center. For the most part, if you were coming from another angle, you didn't know what it was. And if you look over at the tower on the left, it's a bunch of stairs going down to it. The yellow awning up at the top is a restaurant we'll take a look at. But the tower, they then decided they would start making some additions to it. They put a lifesaver up on the top to draw attention. 39, the lifesaver had a huge presence of the parachute jump. Here, they basically had a very small one. The Better Living Center tried all sorts of things to draw attention. They hung these colored ribbons from the side of the building, which would flip in the wind and try to get you to look at it. They actually realized maybe they put their name on all four sides of the building. They really tried to draw attention to it, and it was kind of anticlimactic when you got in. Again, Lifesaver, that was their big contribution to this fair. Again, more signage. You could go and see live animals. You could see Elsie the cow, all sorts of things. And we're going to go inside and take a look. The Better Living Center was plagued by financial woes from the very beginning. As you're going up the escalator here, you can see there was no money to put a roof in or ceiling in, so you had all sorts of exposed infrastructure. The World's Fair files are full of letters back and forth between the Fair Corporation and the people that ran the Better Living Center, saying if you don't get rid of those exposed wires, the broken electric outlets, and the ripped seams and carpets and everything, we're going to shut you down. It was a constant set of problems. But this was basically the model for IKEA. They would take you up there were escalators to make it very, very easy to get up to the top of the Better Living Center, and then stairs that would take you back down. And there was no easy way to say, I'm tired of this place, I don't like it, I'm going to just run to the exit, because you had, just like IKEA, you had to go past all of the displays and work your way all the way back down. Some of the displays pretty cheesy. This guy here is showing some kitchen appliance. There was all sorts of things in there. Again, any mom and pop guy, you could rent yourself a tiny little tabletop stand and be selling your knives to do slicing and dicing or anything else. A number of big companies did end up in the Better Living Center when the World of Food Pavilion was not able to be finished in time. You did end up with some larger exhibits like Hershey candy bars, Canada Dry soda, that sort of thing. But you had all sorts of other things. You could go in here and get an example of what American Thread could offer the people that were doing their sewing and that sort of thing. This one, if you don't know what it was, you'd be hard pressed, but this is part of the exhibit from Canada Dry Soda, showing you how effervescent their drinks were, and I guess the mountain behind you is supposed to give you an idea of cleanliness and that. You could go and get a display of Richelieu pearls. And this was one I got a real kick out of. I remember as a kid, 12 years old, being very naive. How did they do that? Culligan water just pouring frantically out of this faucet hanging in midair, not being very smart to realize there's a plastic pipe bringing the water up that shoots back down. And I've made point of the fact I've seen this display at numerous different World's Fairs. I've also seen it here at the LA County Fair. But every time I go to a World's Fair and there's one of these fountains, faucets floating in the air, I'm right back to 1964. You could also go visit Elsie the cow. They had a whole show up there where they had these figures that would come out, slide across the stage, do all sorts of things, and then the thing would reveal that Elsie was on display. I don't know how many Elsies they went through for the period of the fair, but it was a big thing for people to, you can see all the heads in the audience to go see Elsie the cow. Elsie was also appearing simultaneously at Freedom Land, so somehow there was more than one Elsie the cow. I don't know which was the real one. This is a very blurry picture, but it's of the whatever 56, 62, whatever the number was, live animals. If people got TV Guide back then, you might remember their main critic was a guy named Cleveland Amory, and he had this whole big thing about how animals were our friends. Really big, one of the guys on preventing animal cruelty and that, but he had this strange sort of exhibit where animals were just living in normal houses. And, you know, most of us have a cat or a dog, or some people may have a pot-bellied pig. But in this particular one, you have a, kangaroo or a wallaby down below. You have a llama, something in the back. And they're in a regular house. And I have another picture of one of the poor people that worked in this exhibit having to clean up after one of the animals. So it sort of a strange exhibit. I don't know what point he was making, but if anybody has a kangaroo at home, please let us know. One of the best things in this display for folks like me that are train fans was a tremendous model railroad. It was absolutely a huge installation down there, multiple tracks, all sorts of different scenes of urban settings, mountain settings, and the trains all ran back and forth. It was great fun. to the point I can remember one day my dad in particular asking if I was going to spend the entire day there. He could just come and pick me up on the way home. Because my train set at home was maybe 1/100th of maybe 1/1000th of the size of this thing, but it was a fascinating thing to watch. And again, you can see here kind of a pose picture because I didn't let you walk up and normally touch it, but they had in the background working Ferris wheels and the apartment buildings that lights came on, went off. It was an amazing train set. Up at the top, mentioned that yellow awning before. You had the Hilton Cafe up here, a very nice restaurant, or so they tell me. It was out of the Cotter family budget at the time. But I don't know how the food was, but the views were spectacular. You got to go and eat up there and look out over the fair. People obviously well dressed, enjoying their time up there. But they had different meals from around the world. The menus pop up all the time on eBay, and you can go and see it. But a great spot up there. The best spot by far, people say, of the Better Living Center. We're going to continue to something near and dear to my heart, the Boy Scout exhibit. Boy Scouts had an outdoor display, and it was a very popular area. I went there first in '64 with my troop, and all the troops that were visiting the fair would go by and visit this particular area. Then they also had something, the Scout Service Corps, which were scouts from around the United States that would come together, not with your own troop, but you would get together as a temporary troop for a week, or I think it was a 1-week assignment we did. You'd get the red jacket, you can see a guy wearing in the back there, and you'd be assigned to different duties around the fairgrounds. We had a miniature Unisphere in here. People may have remembered seeing this on the Macy's Thanksgiving Day float at one point, brought in. And you could come down and register in the guidebooks down below. You could also pick up brochures that you could mail in a card, and somebody would contact you for become a member of the Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts when you got back home. And you could get a picture taken, be a forest fire preventer with Smokey the Bear, or, as I mentioned, the Scout Service Corps. It was a great thing. You got to stay out of Fort Totten, I think it was, for a week. Being with kids from all around the country, they would make a big march around the fairgrounds and then drop you off at various places to work. If you were lucky, you got a lightweight nylon red jacket. If you were at other times of the year, you got one of our heavy red wool jacket, which was great fun to wear as it started getting warmer and warmer. But they would have things like standing here outside the U.S. Pavilion. When I do the talk about Federal and State Pavilion, people kept coming up to pose to their picture with the eagle here, and those lights down below just got mangled, kicked, and broken left and right. So they tried putting a small fence around it. People climbed over that, and then you got to stand here as a Boy Scout and tell people, please don't do that. And in 1964, they listened. You also got to go in 1965, the duty of letting people ring the replica Liberty Bell at the Pennsylvania exhibit that was added for '65. So it was great fun. Moving along, we come to Chunky Square, Chunky Candies. I don't know if they still make Chunky Candies. I don't see them out here in California. They might still be someplace back east. But Chunky Candy had a candy factory. It's the long building that's down below the kind of mustard-looking building. They showed how they would make a candy bar. It would all start in the section down below where it had the white part of the roof. It then would go up to the other section of the building, and they would wrap it. Early pictures of '64 showed they had a glass tunnel right between the two parts of the building, and they found out as it got hot, not only did Boy Scouts get hot, but the candy bars would melt in the glass tunnel, so they ended up putting a cover over it, and it would go into the wrapping area there. Down below, it was very popular because they gave out free candy bars. So this is the line for Chunky Candy. Everybody's waiting to get in there to go get their free candy bar. And they had a kind of interesting playground that these were different shapes that didn't look like anything until you lined them up. So in this particular one, if we're looking at our elephant here, he's actually two separate pieces. His head and trunk are one. And you can see a slightly different look or texture to the elephant piece over to the right. That was his bottom part. And if you were just down on the ground, it just looked like two abstract pieces. But they had these strategically located holes and other things. So if we went over to the elephant and looked back the other direction from his eye hole, you would now see some other pieces of the sculpture lined up. After the fair ended, these ended up going out to a playground of a school district out in Nassau County, New York, where I believe they're still sitting out there today. This during 1964 was called just the Pavilion, which is kind of interesting because you think about, you had the Bell System Pavilion, you had the General Electric Pavilion, so here you had the Pavilion. But in 64, it was used for an all-purpose hall of things. Here we have the Olympic trials going on for weightlifting. They would go in there. On Sundays, they would have a lot of church services held there. If you were bringing your organization into town and you wanted to have the International Order of World Fair enthusiasts, you could rent this pavilion, have your speeches, that sort of thing. So there were all sorts of things done in 64, but it was pretty much underutilized. So in 1965, Winston Churchill had recently died, and a group got together and said, we'd like to do an exhibit to honor Winston Churchill, and they rented out the pavilion, and it became the Winston Churchill Center. So all sorts of exhibits of his paintings, things he had done in there. Here's a self-portrait he had done. They had displays of all sorts of editorial cartoons that were published about him. Over to the left, pictures of him from various years. Evidently, he liked to wear hats of all different types, and they had pictures of these. They also had a number of the hats on display. They recreated his office and brought it over. For those of us in the Disney family, we know everybody likes to go see Walt's office when it was touring. Here, people got to see these were actual furnishings and that out of his real study. Strange piece of art. I cannot figure out. I mean, this gets to me something out of the some DC Comics swamp creature or something. A very strange sculpture. I looked and looked and looked and tried to find out whatever became of this after the fair, joking that maybe the guy finished it and we can't recognize it today. But if anybody knows where this particular piece of statue went, please do let me know. And we're going to continue now. We had seen this picture earlier with the Mustard building down below, but we're going to be looking more up the circular building up in the center. By the way, I mentioned earlier the Fountain of the Planets and the Pool of Industry. In a future talk, I'm going to be talking about the fountains and some of the various infrastructure things at the fair. Massive set of fountains and had to be seen to believe. But let's take a look at Clairol. Clairol was a very unique pavilion because it was women only. Men had to wait outside, and it was conveniently near several beer serving pavilions. These white bubble things off to the right, you could stick your head in and see yourself with different hairstyles. And if you then went into the pavilion, they would have more things to tell you, the particular hair dye that you should be using. You should be able to, buy. Matter of fact, there was a booth right at the very end that you could go and buy your favorite Clairol products that you had just seen. As somebody's mentioning in the chat, the Churchill Pavilion is still at the fairground site today. It's now the metal framework used for the aviary at the Queen Zoo. But again, lots of women all lined up, ready to go and see what they would look like if they were a blonde, a brunette, if they had an updo, a beehive, whatever particular sort of hairdo they're going to get. Couple men waiting and passing time, waiting for them to come back out. I guess they were not able to go off and get a beer, but today, of course, if you had a women's only pavilion, that would not fly. So it was kind of an interesting cultural moment back then. We're going to go down the road to Coke. Mentioned in the past, Coca-Cola was offered a pavilion by Disney. They were going to have a major dinner show with basically the idea of tiki birds on steroids. With all sorts of exploding volcanoes and lava flows and that. And Coke decided to go with a different sort of motif. They went with a thing where Coke is sold around the world, and the big draw here was the odorizers that they used. So if you were in Hong Kong, you get the smell of a Hong Kong harbor. If you were up in the Alps, you got fresh pine smell, that sort of thing. So they did these very intricate sets that you would walk through. You could see the Taj Mahal in the background. Again, Hong Kong harbor. So again, smelling fish, that sort of thing. I admire the amount of detail they put into it today. I still try to figure out how that helps sell Coca-Cola. You could go into the ruins of Angkor Wat. You could see in the jungle how people would cool off Coca-Cola in a mountain stream. And this was kind of interesting. Again, a jungle scene, this Jeep, conveniently placed cooler of Coca-Cola. Folks may recall the story of a young kid. I forget his last name right now. I think his first name was Dominic. He ran away from home and he lived at the World's Fair for about a week. And his main hideout was in this jungle scene behind this Jeep. And this is not Dominic. It was some other kid that decided to wander into the jungle. But Dominic would hide in there, come out at night, go to the fountains, pick money out that people had thrown in fountains for good luck, come out and use the money to buy hot dogs and hamburgers to survive at the fair. So a fascinating story. His sister said that the family was not real happy with Dominic when they finally found him and got him home. And Dominic probably couldn't sit down for a month. But again, looking at this, you would not realize somebody was camping out back there. Big part of the Coke was this massive Carillon Tower of Bells, which is now in Stone Mountain, Georgia. They would have a performer play several times a day down there. I always try to figure out, where do you learn to play one of these things? I mean, complicated as can be, and there can't be too many places you can actually go and take lessons. But this was, again, all transported down in Georgia today. And you could go out there and outside they had Coke displays. People will swear you get free Coke at the Coke Pavilion, free Pepsi at the Pepsi Pavilion. No, if you look at the signs, it was ice cold drinks for 10 cents. And you can see they had all sorts of brands. I guess some of them were retiring, getting rid of Tab, and we had Fanta. I don't know what it was on the bottom right there. It was already gone at that point in time, but you could come down and get soda in these cups. Brightly colored gold foil cups, which turn up from time to time on eBay, that shows people able to take all sorts of things home. We're going to continue down the road now to Continental Insurance. Oh, there's one of the clocks again my Uncle Bill put in on the side. So they're, again, all wired back to the Swiss Pavilion. Continental Insurance had a display about American heroes, and we all know George Washington, or we all know some of the other famous names, but they really went into the fact that there were all sorts of other soldiers that did all sorts of things you might not have known their names or were equally heroic. So here we see them transporting the guns over to Fort Ticonderoga as they brought them over on wooden sleds pulled by horses and oxen, saving the American flag at a battle, really intricate dioramas. And as I mentioned here, they did a record album of it about people that you never would have heard of. It said, "Do you ever hear Timothy Murphy, a real son of a gun?" Most of us would never know who Timothy Murphy was, or Alan McLean, or any of these people. And that's what this particular pavilion went and saluted, was the unsung heroes. Actually, they were sung at this point because they did the sound, but the basically unknown heroes of the Revolution. You could also come theoretically get one of these hats. I don't, it says that, I guess on opening day, I never saw anybody with one. I don't think I've ever seen one turn up, but you can get your Continental Soldier hat. We're going to go into the second pavilion of how not to build a pavilion for the World's Fair. This is a piece of artwork for the Hall of Education. Very nice looking pavilion, and it's one of those examples again where it's you can do anything on paper, and when you actually have to construct it, budgets become a different situation. The Hall of Education, the real life one, was another one of those things that was a kind of weird one. I mean, again, we're going to go in and we're going to have displays here on Grolier Encyclopedia, the World Book, on dictionaries, on all sorts of educational things. So you think about, if you went to the World's Fair and you had kids, did they really want to go in and see a display of encyclopedias? And if you didn't have kids, you probably weren't particularly interested in these things anyway. So in 1964, it was a Hall of Education. They had some displays about schools of the future, this sort of thing. They had one thing in here. This was an artist mock-up yet. That was the New York Daily News would run this, and you would come in and they have polls every day where you would take a vote on is the governor doing a good job? How's the mayor doing? What kind of vacation are you planning and taking? And then they would put these results of these out in the Daily News the next day. So you would see that on Monday, here's what people voted at the World's Fair. But it was the whole overall, the pavilion was not a success at all. It had a lot of problems, again, with all sorts of things that made no particular sense, a real lack of quality control. The best thing about it was this playground out back that when your parents were inside looking at trying to decide they were going to buy a set of World Book encyclopedias, you could come around and climb out on these figures out back, get your picture taken, kind of fun thing. And then in '65, there's a new sign over the building. It's now the Demonstration Center. And it became an even tackier set of collections of things where you could go and get exhibits of, here's what you could buy stuffed animals. Actually, you couldn't actually buy a lot of stuff there. They weren't allowed to really sell some of their exhibits, but you could go in and see exhibits of why you should go to some company and buy their stainless steel frying pans, or why you should buy their teddy bears, or why you should buy all sorts of things. So the Demonstration Center, again, kind of a real disappointing part of the fair. But we get to one of the good points of the fair now, the Dupont Exhibit, very, very popular show. The colored dots hanging around the pavilion are a replica of a giant atom or molecule blown up. Wonderful World of Chemistry was an absolutely fantastic show done with a combination of live performers interacting with people on the screen. So that you have these panels behind the performers, and they would at times do things that take a rose, hand it to the performer on the screen, and then that performer then handed it off to another live performer. So it was all very carefully synchronized. I'm very bad on names. I should have written this down, as I knew I'd forget it. A very popular Broadway choreographer and showman did this stuff. But it was a great show that they would entertain you, talking about how wonderful chemistry was, getting you all excited, and then you would go off after they were all done singing and dancing. You would go off to a demonstration of actual chemistry techniques in the lab. All sorts of bubbling and popping things are going on, lots of chemicals and that. Albert Fisher was talking in one of the prior talks about how they had to get this thing fine-tuned, because when they were trying to do it for the TV special, they would say, and now we're going to make plastic, and it wouldn't work, or now we're going to do this. But over time, they got it really down. So they're showing here again, I took 2 clear liquids, I shake them together, and it turns into a very dark liquid. In this particular case, they showed the stain-resistant nature of Zeppel, new thing that came out of the folks in the labs, that they would take all these different things, pour it on there, and because the word Zeppel had been done with this non-coat or a special coating, it would not stain. You could also come out and they would show you their other things that were being done for Corfam shoes and other particular products of the company. Moving down below, we have Dynamic Maturity, which is better known today as the AARP, same organization. Up top, that strange looking sculpture on the top is a camera obscura that you can walk in. You can kind of see the reflective panel that would show you parts of the fairground that you could walk in there and look up, and sort of a giant periscope effect. And again, you can see off to the side here, it was the National Retired Teachers Association and the AARP. And they had a whole thing in here that start planning for your retirement. And if you want to take leisure trips and things like that, we can help you with it. They also had a kind of pleasant garden inside that they suggested people could come in and get away from the hustle and bustle. We're going to go to one of the big pavilions of the fair, Eastman Kodak. Black and white picture here, just because I like to capture the overall size of this. And because this was taken before the fair actually opened, there were not a lot of crowds blocking the exhibits. But you can see you had the undulating moon roof up above, the giant pictures up above, and we'll get more into those. And then down below, all sorts of displays about Kodak products and Kodak technology. It was a massive pavilion. The thing people remember most are the giant pictures up there. This was right at the time Kodak had introduced the idea of instant photography, not instant, but easy photography with the Instamatic cameras, the carousel slide projectors, and the building was designed to invoke a feeling of a Kodak slide projector. So a lot of people thought these were actual slides that they were looking at. And in reality, they were giant prints on a very reflective paper. And those big black things sticking out below each of these is a giant set of lights that would shine up on the pictures. If you go to my website, worldsfairphotos.com, there's a copy of an article, I think, from Popular Science magazine about how these were done. But they were done in strips, I think about 8 or 9 strips of paper held up there through a pneumatic system that kept them in place and lit up from down below. These were all done by professional photographers that Kodak had worked with before to do exhibits at Grand Central and other places. And they were put up there, rotated throughout the period of the fair. Again, these were just great. The color rendition on these was absolutely super. During the daytime, they showed up very well, despite the whatever amount of sunlight, glare, anything you had on it. The paper they used was not reflective to the point that the glare would show on it, but it was reflective at night that the lights made it pop out. So I just have a couple different pictures of these things. They had all sorts of themes. Where in spring, you had all sorts of pictures of brides and things happening. In summer, you had water skiers. In winter, you can see there's over to the left a woman with a bunch of fall foliage, and we have a football game going on. So they would change these basically as the seasons would change, and the real world, the pictures would change to match those up above. Mentioned in another talk, a woman got in touch with me a couple of years ago to say, I was one of the models for the World's Fair. I was with a bunch of other people jumping rope. Did you happen to have a copy of the picture? And I did. It turned out those are not her. That's not her mother, not her sisters or anything. They were all models hired by a photographer out here in California to do this rope skipping. And she had never had a copy of it, so I sent her a copy, and she wrote back, "Oh, it's too bad I wasn't wearing a purple dress," and because she has some internet business selling purple clothes and purple healing crystals and purple everything. So through the magic of Photoshop, a few minutes later, she had herself in a purple dress. But again, these pictures were just phenomenal. I was a huge photography nut, as people may guess. And in 1969, I was offered a chance to, actually 73 when I graduated out of college, I was offered a chance to go to work for Kodak, which I turned down and went into submarines instead. But to be, you know, Kodak was just a wonderful American company. It's amazing what's happened over time. But again, just a couple of these. Then up at top, you have over on the left side, Emmett Kelly Jr., clown. Kodak, he was actually up there twice. He had the honor. But Kodak hired him to be there at the fair, and people would come out and take pictures of him, and pictures and pictures and pictures, which worked out great. He was quite the character. He would also carry the stack of postcards and sign autographs and pass them out. And I wasn't quite sure who Emmett Kelly was at that point in time, but I still have the postcard he signed, which is the first autograph I got from anybody. And he would wander around the fairgrounds with this giant, oversized Instamatic picture camera on his shoulder, basically about half the size of him, and walk around pretending to take pictures of people, and quite entertaining. We're up at the moon roof now. Again, this was all done with shaped pieces of plywood that were all formed into these waves of things going up and down, covered over in concrete. That's a small theater off that opening to the right there. Again, just kind of a surreal sort of thing up there. Very great for picture taking. And people just wander up there taking pictures up there, or going up there to take pictures of the surrounding area. These guys all decked out. They've obviously been to an Arlington hat store. They've been to the Hawaii Pavilion to get their leis. And down below, people are now getting ready to go into the main theater to go see The Searching Eye, a very interesting film Kodak did about, again, trying to interest people in the visual aspects of life. And these are a couple of frame grabs that a visitor got off the screen in there. Just all sorts of fun as we hop through there. Down below, Golden Dandelions, Herbert Bertolia. Again, I'm bad on names, hopefully got that. These were very interesting, that they're very thin sets of golden wires all back to this central hoop. They would kind of blow in the breeze and move back and forth. Here, as you can see them in a fountain setting, and luckily these have survived during the museum. And down below, as I mentioned, all sorts of exhibits on the Kodak products. You could buy Kodak cameras, Kodak film. There were displays about Kodak chemicals, all sorts of things. You could here trying to tell you to take underwater photography, nature photography, vacation photography. They also had contests like this area here where you could enter a competition and have your photo. You had to be a member of a photo club, and then your photo club would submit their winnings for, say the Baldwin New York Photo Club, which there was none, but if there was one, they would have sent it off to Kodak. And Kodak would put people's pictures on display, and you got a neat little certificate that your pictures had been on display for the month of January, July, whatever, at the World's Fair. As I mentioned, displays of chemicals that they would make for the various products that they sold. And off to the right, you can see a shop where they had all the latest cameras, editors, flash cubes, all sorts of things there. Again, more things about their international operation. All these companies had to make sure that their international subsidiaries were well represented, because as I mentioned with Ford and GM, they had taken such a piece of their ad budget and put it into this massive pavilion that they had to make sure the overseas folks were being talked about. They also had these dioramas where you could come in and they would show you how close-up photography worked. You would put your camera on a stand, adjust it with the settings that they told you, and you could get a picture of the bird with the eggs. You could get a picture of the squirrel here, or these Disney characters. And people would marvel about, a lot of people had never thought about doing close-up photography before. It was always pictures of the kids having their sport teams or Christmas presents or something like that. Going down the road, Equitable Life Assurance. The demograph here was the population of the United States now. There was a great location out on the Pool of Industry. If you look at those two semicircular arcs there, that's where the Flushing River had been rerouted to come into this particular fountain. So the fact it's a tidal river, I mentioned in another talk, they could cut this, there were valve gates inside there. They could cut the river off. As the tide would go out, it would flow out the other end and the water level would go back down. And that's how this wooden ramp here would appear. This platform was normally underwater, but during the day, they would let the fountain go down. That wooden ramp would pop up. They would walk out on it and restock the firework mortars for that particular night's show. So they walked out, did their work, opened the gates up, and flooded back, and the walkway was not seen again. If you look right to the right of the Equitable Insurance was a set of VIP stands for the fireworks, and you had to know somebody to get a ticket to go in there at night. But if you got to know it, you could get to Equitable a bit before the show, sit on the benches they had there, and Equitable had the best non-VIP seating for the fireworks. So if you ever get your time machine and it's working, go back, get a good spot at Equitable about an hour and a half before the show, and you'll be all set. The population, again, I've mentioned before, I thought at that time that this was the actual population of the United States. They had counted everybody. They had somebody in every hospital saying, Mrs. Jones had a baby, bump it up one. Oh, we lost Mr. Jones, bump it down one. Well, it never went down because the population just keeps growing. This was all a statistical projection of how many people were at the United States at that point in time. Someday we intend to try to figure out how you could date photos by what numbers are appearing on this particular chart. It's one of those projects we get started on and we don't ever finish. And they had a VIP lounge, as many as the other pavilions did. This is the back side of the demograph, and a little VIP lounge for their people to come and entertain out there. And it showed up really well at night. Gigantic digital letters or numbers and shown across the fountain showed up very nicely. Festival of Gas, people were mentioning earlier, they didn't realize how big this pavilion was. This was all sorts of the gas companies across the United States that provided gas. So in New York, we had Brooklyn Union Gas. We had all sorts of different gas companies. This is not like one big Ma Bell type phone company with lots of gas companies. And they got together. Back then, it's hard to believe they were still trying to convince people that air conditioning was something that you could really have. And so many of these systems were powered by gas, so they had exhibits there. So we're going to go and take a look at inside some of the exhibit areas here. We walked into a carousel area. This thing rotated around. You had all these figures out there. Humphrey the Bear being up there. Down below, a set of elephants and that. Great things to entertain kids. Up above, restaurant, we'll take a look more at that. Behind it, the names of all the independent gas companies that help contribute to this. And again, the entrance area going on in and these kind of comical displays. A stylized fountain, very interesting, done to represent the gas flickering away. And here's Humphrey again. You could see how gas, I don't know what Humphrey the Bear and 500-pound weights had to do with gas, but you know, all sorts of other shows, the tale of Truthful George and things that entertain the kids going through it. They had several theaters where you could get cooking displays. So these ladies would come out and show you how to make a full meal, sort of like the cooking channels we have now. And they would extol the virtues of gas. You had gas cooktops, gas ovens, and they would bring down an amateur chef from the audience and have him or her make some creation and then be able to nibble on it after they had popped it in the oven. They also would do displays outside. This woman, I do have her name someplace, was supposed to be one of the premier barbecue experts of the world at the time. And she would come out and give people examples of how to barbecue. And then lucky people would get to have a taste of her labors. And again, it looks like charcoal briquettes, but they were trying to convince you that you could get a gas barbecue in your backyard and give you the flavor and the appearance of briquettes, but you did not need briquettes, you needed gas. More technical looking display of pipes and everything that show you how the gas industry worked. And at night, they could light it up with different colors and different patterns. Again, kind of interesting thing. Oh, I mentioned the restaurant. I went by it real quickly. The glass area up there was a very nice restaurant. Again, kind of out of my budget. Albert Fisher went there a lot. Their initial concept been to surround it with air curtains. So you'd be eating outdoor and have a giant curtain of air, keep the hot air out and the cool air in. Didn't work out. They ended up putting those glass panels in, and they had to really step up the air conditioning inside as a result. But lots and lots and lots of pictures of the restaurant, not because a lot of people ate there, because again, budget issues, but because there was one of the infamous Kodak picture spot signs outside. So we're going to go to a 1965 edition. This had not been rented out for 1964. It was a giant empty lot. They put this area in for the international market, folk art and stuff from around the world. They had kind of an interesting gimmick that if you were able to fit underneath a certain size door, you were a kid, you could go in for free. Adults had to pay. They moved this cart over from the Pan American highways when it shut down. And again, we can see big signs for the International Snack Bar. You went in, it was a popular spot to eat, all sorts of different foods. You could get a hamburger if you wanted to get the traditional American thing, but you could get a kebab. You could get all sorts of different dishes from around the world. And then they also had performers who would come in. So again, if you had a Ukrainian group that wanted to entertain, you could come in. If you were a New York group, you might be at the New York State Pavilion, but if you were, say, a Ukrainian group or whatever from Ohio, you might come and participate here. First National Bank had two presences at the fair, the official bank of the fair. This is kind of a lousy picture, but down below you see a square box just to the left of the street light. That was the first ATM that we've been able to find pictures of, that you would actually go up to that. You would stick your money and stuff into a chute. It would shoot it into the bank. They would shoot stuff back to you. And it was the very first off-site banking that people had done. They also had an exhibit showing how Citibank was shown from around the world. And they had another branch back up in the top north western side of the fair. And that was the commercial area where all the pavilions brought all their money and did all their work. The first one had more exhibits for people about international banking and how wire transfers worked and things like that. This one was pretty much bringing money in, we'll give you a deposit slip, thank you, and we'll move on. Formica, back then, big thing about Formica tabletops and countertops and everything. They built a house, the only hill in the fairgrounds, which they'd used from dirt excavated for other pavilions brought out there. You did not walk through the front door of this house. It was actually roped off because you came in the side and you got to see an entire house full of plastic countertops and that. Formica sold these plans and you could go and build houses around the U.S. I remember one being built in Queens. A couple others were still around, but it was again an exhibit of housing. I'm way behind schedule, so I'm going to start rushing through here. Again, this was such a fantastic part of the fair. Now, all of us, of course, that are Disney fans know about the Carousel of Progress and General Electric. Huge hit. this was an empty area in '64 that had not been rented out by another pavilion, which was great because you can see this line. At this point in time, it's about a 2-hour wait for these people waiting on the line, and it actually goes out of sight down below the picture down below. So when it originally started, this large group of people to the right, that was not there. They added that in as a dirt field, then they paved it in. They ended up putting in trash cans and stuff for the crowd. In '65, they came back and they added this other set of areas, which was very welcome to keep people out of the shade, out of the sun rather than the shade. They also had exhibits of GE products in there. But if you look in that entire area is chock full of people waiting to go see the Carousel of Progress. That's how popular this attraction was. Again, a bunch of the Pinkerton guards working very hard. Looking down below, they had these signs up above on telling you waiting time. I've seen some of them that say 120 minutes of waiting time. And we're now into the theater, the kaleidophonic screen. This was a color organ. Disney actually had the patents on this and managed to let them lapse at some point in time. But there were 6 theaters. You'd walk in and you'd see the GE carousel here. You'd go around, see the different 4 acts, and then you came out of another theater, which looked just like this one. But while you were coming out of theater 6, people were walking into theater 1. And as the narration and music went, this thing would change colors and pictures. Example of what it would look like, you had the woman back there. We'll take a look more in a second. She's sitting there watching as we go around. She's kind of in focus. The stage is not, because the audience is rotating around the center theater. And for those that ever wanted to know how you make it work, this is the set of controls they had to make sure that all the theaters were in alignment, that they were all ready to go. She had a PA system that she would tell you, no flash photography, please. Kind of interesting. And it was, again, a GE system that was using GE products, but designed by Walt Disney, now WIT Enterprises, now Imagineering. So we get to see Dad and his dog over the years. The dog would bark at the audience and he'd say, "Don't bark, they might be a GE stockholder." And the story is pretty well familiar, that we start back in somewhere around the turn of the century. Father is talking about the wonderful things that these fellows from a company called GE are going to do. We show off our appliances and talk about how things have become. And Mother is, of course, working away, daughter is working away, doing the laundry, and Dad's having a great time just pontificating. Then we go into the roaring 20s. We have wires everywhere. Again, we now have the wonders of GE electric refrigerators. The poor dog doesn't get to drink from the cistern anymore, but just life as we move through it. Again, this show is monumental. Again, 2-hour waits were not uncommon for it during this period of time. Again, super lifelike figures. Everybody talks about Mr. Lincoln. You know, he was done much more lifelike than these folks were. He also had a stand-up, which these didn't. But these figures did do a lot with tapping their hands, turning their head, looking around. We again had behind the scrims, you had rotating stages. The lights would bring up. You'd see one set of characters going on. The lights would go down. The stage would rotate. The lights would come up. You'd see another set of characters. We're into the 50s now. Things have gotten much more modern looking. Again, we have our great GE refrigerators making life good, all sorts of wonderful appliances, and our dad and his dog. And poor Mom is still working away. She's never had it too easy. Babs is trying to lose weight for her upcoming date. And we finally get into the modern times. Mom is out of the drudgery, and she's a full member of the family. She's allowed to talk and interact with the audience. It's Christmas time, and all sorts of presents waiting under the tree, many of them GE, of course. Lots of cards. Kind of interesting, the set of table over here to the left is, I think the auction is still going on, but somebody actually came up with this set of tables. It had been used at the 64 fair when GE moved out to the Disneyland. The set of tables came out. It's up for auction, and people are figuring it's going to go for a huge amount of money. So if you wanted to know what plastic tables and chairs would look like, there we go, and lots of presents. But now we're done, the Carousel of Progress, and that's where most of us know it ends, because if you go to Disney World today, you just see the Carousel of Progress and leave. This poor lady is valiantly holding back the crowd, telling them, wait, there's more, and I'm going to get you up there. And now you go up this set of a speed ramp upstairs, waiting the wonders up there. We're all going to join the crowd going up. And there's all sorts of stuff in what GE does, all sorts of displays about all the manufacturing things they do, chemical things they do. I think some of the products like a jet engine, cutaway display of it here, how they made helicopter engines, plane engines, train engines, all sorts of things. Talking about GE was getting into nuclear reactors at that point in time. Pretty soon your whole town was going to be powered by a GE nuclear reactor. And let's go get an example of how GE is going to power your world through Walt Disney's Sky Dome Spectacular. So we're going to walk in, as the sign sees, we're going to get a display of nuclear fusion, which is different than nuclear fission. So we're walking down, there's a big dome device down below, more nuns getting ready to look at it. And this device is going to show us how nuclear fusion is going to work and cheaply power our homes of the future. So we're going to go and put this thing together. It's going to blast up to 90,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's going to put out all this electricity. I always get a kick out of here. 60,000 something successful experiments and 780 something unsuccessful. And I wonder if those are the crowds that glowed in the dark at night or something. But they would set this thing off with a blinding flash. They would pronounce a success, and you'd move on. You'd move on to examples of GE products again. You can get dishwashers, you can get air conditionings, all sorts of things. They had the whole product center you could wander through. This was the home study nook that you were going to get for your kids for the future. Again, there's a set of encyclopedias we all had to have. All sorts of things about hair dryers and hair curlers and all sorts of things that women needed to beautify themselves. And then one of the best features of GE is going outside and seeing the roof. It was a computerized control system of colored lights, and it could be all one pattern, all red, all green, all blue, whatever, or swirling lights. It generally went in a counterclockwise direction, but sometimes they could swirl it back the other way. Again, the Tower of Light over to the right, GE off to the left. It was amazing to see this thing lit up at night. The computer system that ran this was roughly half the size of the office I'm sitting in today. At the end of the fair, they sold it off for pennies on the dollar because how many people needed a system to do what this thing could do. Again, just a couple of examples of the color of it flashing away at night. Then we're going to go to the House of Good Taste, the last one for today. Again, it's interesting to see how things develop over time. When they first put this in, you see it, and it didn't really scream out what it was. I mean, the very small signage up there, the House of Good Taste. Well, they fixed that by putting in big signage, 3 beautiful homes, restaurant, more signs, here, come on in, lots of things. And basically what it was a compound here, artist rendition of 3 different types of home, a contemporary home, a modern home, a futuristic sort of home. And in each of these homes, everything was on a display of things you could go and buy at through a catalog for existing people. So you had the house, a kind of contemporary house, even had a garage that you could look in, car parked outside. Back patio looked like, what many of us might have. And inside you had all sorts of furnishings. And there was a catalog, again, would say, if you would want to buy this piano, or if you'd want to buy, any particular piece of furnishing, you could go off and look at your catalog and go off and order it. Modernistic kitchen, probably done with and help with Formica. Modern living room. People generally behave themselves, but every now and then some people just had to be part of the action. They'd climb over the railing and take a picture of themselves roaming throughout the houses. They obviously didn't put anything in the cabinets because they didn't expect this lady to show up. But you can see, like right here, for example, the 129 thing that would tell you, here's what this table setting is. This is table 129, and here's how you could buy everything that's on it. I'm sure many of our houses look just like this, color test. And again, telephones. I think this was called the Joan Crawford room. She helped design it. And again, all sorts of things you would get in different houses, including every house back then was designed to have a bar. Modern kitchen. More pictures around. Then you would go outside. Of course, all houses of the future would have their own sculpture garden of various types. And if you didn't have a sculpture garden, you could get a piece to go inside. So a few minutes over, but that is the looking back at the industrial area. So let me just, I try to look at some of the chats, but it was a little, what you call it, hard to do both. If anybody has questions before I try to look at these, wave your hand and I'll be glad to unmute you and see what you like to point out that I didn't. Actually, if you're going to point out anything I did wrong, stay quiet. If you have a question though, or addition, please raise your hand and we'll see what we can do. You can either use the raise hand button, which should pop your name. Okay, Irv. So let's see, Irv, ask to unmute. You should be able to unmute yourself, Irv. There you go.
There you go. Just looking at the initial map you showed, look how small the fair would have been if it wasn't for the industrial and transportation section. It would have been about a third of its size. And a lot of the buildings in this section, you look back at it today and says, why was this even in a World's Fair? You got to wonder.
Well, they did intend to start with the World's Fair, and they had sent off people to all around the world trying to encourage people to come. And a lot of them started signing letters of intent, letters of interest, that sort of thing. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, Mr. Moses made a mistake, and a lot of the same countries pulled back out. So, you know, the Soviet Union had made a big announcement they were coming. A lot of the South American countries were all coming. There's a book a fellow did, Bruce something, I forget his last name, did a book, Hi Ho to the Fair, and all about how he was down with all the, you know, South American dictators and everything, trying to get him to come to the fair. And then it all imploded when Moses went off on one of his rants. So yeah, luckily American industry stepped into the breach and was able to pull it off.
Yeah, but fortunately, that was probably the best part of the fair.
Oh, I loved it. Don, you had something?
Yeah, I was wondering if you knew whatever became of the film they showed at the Kovac Pavilion. I've searched for it several times. I can't find a trace of it anywhere.
Searching Eye?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a fellow that has all sorts of World's Fair films, and I'm going to have to ask if he has this particular one. So many of the others have shown up, but others have not. So I don't know about that one in particular. It was a Saul Bass production, and it was super popular, well received, and a lot of these things have just kind of gone away.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Oh, okay, Mr. Warner asked to unmute. There you go. Mr. Warner, you can unmute yourself, or are you just waving? Okay, there you go. Sorry. Well, you were muted. Let's do it again. Okay, you should be all set.
Okay, finally there. I remember the demonstration of fusion. I think we were one of the 6,000 successful ones. Do you have any idea what they were actually showing us?
There was I believe a hydrogen atom hit with a giant dose of electricity, and that when it exploded, it would release more electricity, and you know, therefore be able to power other devices. You know, I don't remember all the specifics of what they're going to do, but it was. I do remember it was very, very loud. A tremendous bang when it went off, and a giant flash. So they warned everybody was coming, and you were oohed and awed. And back then, who asked questions? If GE told you were going to be powered by this in 20 years, you know, that was it. They were the guy that made the light bulbs. They knew what they were talking about.
Okay, well, I majored in physics, and we learned in physics, you know, there are certain constants like the gravitational constant and, you know, the electrical and magnetic constants that we use. The constant in physics research has a value of 30 years, and it's how long it will be until we have fusion power.
Mm-hmm.
But since you mentioned the films, I wonder, is To Be Alive available?
Yeah, somebody just mentioned in the chat that Searching Eye is available. The To Be Alive is, I've actually got it on a copy of a DVD. They were selling it through Johnson Waxo a number of years ago. I don't know if they still are or not, but it is available. The trouble a number of these films have is that they were done on multi-screen formats. It's just like if you were going to make a film available of, you know, America the Beautiful, the Circle Vision film. You can't show the entire experience. So on some of these, they've gone off and, you know, they have the center panel or people have recently been trying to recreate the IBM film, which I think was on 22 separate screens. So it's very hard, and that's what makes going to a World's Fair so special. Is, you know, besides the fact you might have a 80-foot high screen that's 90 feet wide or something hard to replicate, it's these interactive things. Just like you know, trying to if you go to Disney, when we had the Energy Pavilion, trying to recreate the pre-show environment with all this you know, moving panels and changing things. It's certain things you can't easily do in the home, but yeah, to be alive, actually you can go to the Johnson Wax Pavilion, the Johnson Wax headquarters, and see it there. They've recreated the Golden Rondelle at the, I guess it's Racine, Wisconsin, and you can see the whole film there, but there is a home video version. Greg, you had a question, a comment? Greg Airbar, let me okay, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay. I wanted to mention the Eames couple, Mr. and Mrs. Eames, because I think it was there were several pavilions that, including, I think, the Searching Eye, because Elmer Bernstein was mentioned, and he did music for several of their films. In fact, there's even a soundtrack album of the music he did in his career. They made a award-winning film called Powers, I think it's Powers of 10. And in one of the last sections of Innoventions, and I don't remember the sponsor, it was referenced, which really shocked me. Hardly anybody saw this pavilion, but they were a design firm, and they designed things that eventually evolved into the Herman Miller office designs, but they designed designs for a living, and they designed an awful lot of things at the pavilions. Did you have specifics about what they did work on?
Yeah, I do, and I tend to hit more of that. I had hoped to get to IBM today, which is why I put some pictures from it in the you know, teaser that I posted. Then at 1:15 this morning, I said no IBM. I was halfway through it, so I'll try to get more into them.
Okay.
And there are other pavilions next week. But yeah, absolutely phenomenal. I was looking at the pictures from IBM, even stuff that people don't realize the design, even just the benches in the waiting area. You know, I mean. You know, furnishings and films and pavilions and shows, and just an amazing set of geniuses for the work they did. So remind me next week, and I'll try to talk more about, you know, I'm going to concentrate on them for IBM, but I'm going to try to talk about some of the other stuff they did as well. You can also go to their site, which is something, I forget what it's called, Eames Organization, something like that. And they have a very nice 7-minute film. That's actually on YouTube too. IBM at the fair, and it goes through a lot of their IBM creations, and great stuff.
Yeah. By the way, getting back to the fusion experiment in General Electric, a lot of people said, was that real, or was that a cheap simulation? And from what I heard, it was actually a real experiment. It was actually done. It seems kind of risky to do that in front of a live audience, though.
No, it was real. And when I worked, when I graduated from college, I worked for GE in a different division. And one of the guys that worked in my division had worked on that particular project at the fair. And he said, "Oh yeah, it was real." And you know, when we were first putting it together, there was a lot of you know, discussion of what would go wrong. So they ran it many times in Schenectady before they ever decided to, you know, do it down for the fair, because they had made such a bet on it with that whole theater, the Disney pre-show, all of it, that it had to work, and it also had to not kill anybody. So he swore it was real, and he swore it was safe. Joey, you had your hand up?
Hi, Bill. I don't know if you mentioned the giant transparencies that were on the Kodak Pavilion. Were those changed manually? Were those, how did they change them every day?
Well, they weren't changed every day. First of all, they weren't transparencies. They were prints. So they came out and did them periodically. They actually, I've got pictures of them hanging, some of them up there. They came up and they were done. If the pictures are down, you can see large circular air intakes behind, where they suck the air up to these things. So they would basically start with one panel, go and put them all the way up with this long rod that they were going and pushing the thing up to get it. And then they would go to the next one and put it all up. So they tended to come in, and I don't have a list. I've been trying to work on it of exactly how many they did and how often they changed them. But they would try to do it during the pre-fair hours, again, so that they didn't ruin the magic of them doing it. but I did catch one day where they were, going off and putting them up there. As soon as the fair ended, they turned off the blowers. They all came crashing down to the ground. Kodak was actually one of the first pavilions finished and one of the first pavilions demolished. The first pavilion finished and open to the public was the Port Authority, because they had the restaurant in there. But Kodak was just amazing. They built this entire pavilion, had it ready to go. And one of the concepts of it was start getting your Kodak pictures up there as early as you can, so everybody driving by on the highway would see it and have a giant interest in coming back to the fair. So, and they were, again, very fast. So I've got pictures of the week that the fair ended. The pictures have all come down, and a month or two later, their jackhammers are tearing that thing to shreds. They wasted no time. Kenneth.
Thanks, Bill.
Sure.
Yeah, I noticed, Bill, that you showed a slide in Carousel of Progress that shows the daughter doing the laundry. I was curious, is that the daughter who disappears and about which there was so much speculation? And can you or anybody else on the call give us an idea of what happened?
I don't know. Maybe some of the other Disney folks that are around can do it. I don't know. All of a sudden, she's there. You have the boy with the father, and he wants to see the hoochie coochie and all the rest of it. And the daughter gets to pump the I don't know. Maybe she fell in and crushed herself to death in the washer or something. But yeah, I mean, I didn't put everything in there. Yesterday, when I started putting this together, I first thought, oh, I'm going to do the industrial area. And then I pulled a GE just on it. And I said, oh, I've got 700 pictures from just GE. I better not show them all. So I didn't get Uncle Orville, or some of those other odds and ends. I just try to grab, pieces that people may remember. And, I've got a picture of Uncle Orville in his bathtub where everybody's horrified to see that Uncle Orville doesn't have legs he's got Uncle Orville's chest and Uncle Orville's feet and no Uncle Orville in between, sort of thing. So we'll get into some more of those for the building of segment. But that's why I had to start, trying to figure out, like the bell system. I could go on, and obviously I probably went on too long as it was for the bell system, but massive pavilions with incredible displays. And for me, a real life changer that got me into computers and technology. And that's also how I got to be a phone freak and into the New York Times for playing with telephones when I shouldn't have. So another day.
I think that's what's making these talks you're doing now of sub areas of the fair so good, is that you can go in more detail than you've been able to do in the previous broad talk. So keep with it, I think.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah, next week we'll start with IBM and go through the rest of the industrial area, including Small World and Parker Pen and so many of the others. Because again, there were just so many big things in there that I figured next week I'll do industrial area part 2, and then I'll flip a coin. We got to get into the state and federal and see Mr. Lincoln. We got to go and the United States Pavilion and visit that, and then when we do that, Joey can show us some of what he salvaged out of there. So crazy! It's crazy how big the fair was. Then I said, then I could do a whole thing on just the stuff you don't think about, the fountains and the general food arches and the system they use to display the messages on those. And then we'll get into the very sad day of how they all tore it down and smashed it to pieces. So. Anyone else? Dave, let me unmute you here.
I do remember the equipment from the World's Fair going through MAPO in 1967 when I started there, particularly the exercise machine where there's the belt that goes around because basically that was all completely rebuilt to be installed at Disneyland as part of the Tomorrowland. So it was an interesting thing to see that all the equipment was updated that operated it, the cam machines that we built, the new cam machines for those figures.
Well, you didn't reuse the same cam machines. You actually built new ones.
It was a new design at that time. So, I think that's correct. Guys like Glenn might remember better, but I do remember seeing all of that stuff coming through, and not being a California guy and in my early 20s at the time, I was pretty much unaware of the New York's Fair. And, you know, to me, it was like, oh yeah, this stuff's coming back. We need to get it refurbished and ready to go to Disneyland. And then later working on tomorrow's America Sings, which was then put in that same theater, I realized that it's this huge rotating donut that the audience is in this part of the building is this on railroad tracks, radial or circular railroad tracks. The building turns and the stage stays in the middle, constant, in the same place. So that was an interesting experience.
I have an album of about 50 photos or so that the Disney and the architects took showing how they built the GE Pavilion. And as you mentioned, the railroad wheels and axles and the tracks and everything down below. And it's kind of just fascinating to see the amount of infrastructure put in there, the motors to drive it all around. So I'll be hitting that in the future. I was able to acquire some. I think Tom Morris might have helped me with that, but amazing collection of photos on how they built GE.
So the question is, since I was there physically doing the wiring, but the question that I have at this point in time is, were those figures repurposed as is from the fair, or were they completely remade?
It's my understanding that figures were repurposed with some latex changes to make the faces more real life.
I remember seeing the molds, seeing the faces being done, but what I don't know for sure is if the actual fiberglass, plastic pieces that form the bodies were changed. And the question I'd have was the hydraulics all updated to the latest and greatest?
I believe they were all pretty much the same figure. I have the brochure, the booklet that Disney produced to convince GE to bring it out to Disneyland. And there's a big thing in there about how they were able to reuse something like 90% of the existing, items, and therefore they could do it so cheap. They had talked about whether or not they were going to try to do anything with the dome and that sort of stuff, and did not. But I believe that most of the figures were just picked up, refurbished, given a new coat of grease and oil or whatever, and put back out there. But the whole pitch Disney made was, you've already spent this money once, why don't you just put it out here in Disneyland and you can do it El Cheapo, and that's what GE went for.
What I do remember is that at that time, MAPO was created, stands for Mary Poppins, and it was this combination of I was in the electrical union, even though I was doing electronics, but the hydraulics guys and the machinists and everybody most of them had come from the studio, we were all in the same union. And that, I was told, that happened because of difficulties at the World's Fair trying to get things installed that didn't have a union label that said, the union bug that says IBEW. And so the electricians and such, the tradespeople in New York wouldn't install it without that. So we were all in the same union, and the guy next to me was a model maker, and he spent at least 2 months building the little mold for the parachutes that went in the amusement park model that was on the second floor of the GE Pavilion. And I mean, there was a tremendous amount of work that went in to build that model. It wasn't like you could go buy Legos or any of that stuff. It wasn't bought from the store for model railroads or any of that. Everything was made custom just for that model, the Ferris wheel, all the rest.
Well, it's interesting about unions. I was back years ago, the movie Annie. They had gone off and done all sorts of stuff out here, building sets and everything, and sent it back to East. And the New York union started screaming that, hey, this is a New York union job. And they were in the exact same union, but different locals. So it ended up that they had to have the sets reassembled by the New York carpenters because the Western carpenters weren't allowed to reassemble the sets they had built out here in California. And then they got into the fact that, the truck drivers all had to be from the New York local. So they had already signed contracts for all the West Coast truck drivers to bring all this stuff out there. And they basically had to put them in a hotel and let them sit there the entire time we were filming the movie Annie, and not allow them to work on the set. And then they had to bring it all back out here. So yeah, some of these unions, they wonder why, I wonder why they shoot so many movies in Canada these days, you know?
Well, whatever the circumstance was, it was really a magical time because you had everybody. You could, if I needed a little sheet metal bracket, I could go over to the machinists and they would make it, and I could come back and put it on the product that I was working on. So it was a huge collaborative environment, and gosh, looking back, what a great time.
What was the seating capacity in the auditoriums of the Carousel? I thought it was about 600 seats per auditorium. Am I wrong?
I don't know. I don't know if it was that large. I
Yeah,
can
that
look
sounds
up.
pretty big. I would bet
Yeah.
there's something online about that.
Yeah, for example, the People Wall at IBM held 400, which was a huge number. I don't think, I mean, they may have held 150 or 200 or something per theater times X number of theaters, but I can try to look that up and find that. Again, it was a very high capacity ride, you know, and it got people through it, but it had, as you saw with the lines, they were insane. I mean,
So
the
when-
lines are usually much longer for Carousel of Progress than they were for Mr. Lincoln.
So when they moved it to Disneyland, what did they do with the 6th stage where you had the escalator going up to the Sky Dome?
You just went outside, back out of the building.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and that's part of why it rotated in a different direction at Disneyland than it did at the World's Fair. It operated in the opposite direction because of where the audience had to exit back out. Up above in the Disney World, we had Disneyland, the entertainment division had offices upstairs. And then you had, I think the speed tunnel ran through part of it for the People Mover, but it was offices for the entertainment division.
Hey, wasn't that where they had the Progress City model for a while? And then they tore that out and put the offices in later?
Yeah, that was off of the People Mover side, but you didn't go up there. You didn't get to see it, you know, like you did at the fair. You saw it as you went through it on the People Mover.
Okay, I thought you went up to see it. I must be mistaken.
Well, appreciate, folks joining. Oh, Glenn, I see you waving there. Okay, there you go, sir.
Yeah, Bill, I remember seeing Carousel of Progress at Disneyland before I started working with the company. And at the end of it, and the unload, you went right up a moving ramp to the 2nd floor, and that's where you saw the show about
Did you? Okay.
the model of Epcot and everything.
My
So-
error then. It was gone by the time I started there, and I did not realize that. I guess I'm just thinking of the America Sing days.
Yeah, well, I just remember doing that. And then
Yes.
they must have taken it out when we put in the wedway through there.
Right.
They took it out when Florida opened.
As somebody mentioned here, the theater says 226 per theater. So, hey, I guess 225. I wasn't doing too bad.
That's smaller than I thought it was.
Yeah, you know, and it's still a massive structure, you know, to move around and do all that. You know, it's they found out when they let it sit for a number of years, it kind of froze in spot because the thing rusted away, and then they had to unrust it so they could rotate it for interventions and that. But you know, a tremendous facility that I wish today they would still do something with that. I think is absolutely wasted at Disneyland today.
You said you had photographs of the mechanism under the floor, how it worked?
Yeah.
That would be something to see.
Yeah, well, that's going to be an e-ticket ride. We're going to charge double for that show.
Okay.
Great. Anyone else? Harold, you let me get you up here. Harold in Toronto. Should be able to unmute yourself. There you go.
First of all, just thank you for such a fantastic presentation. It really was fascinating. And the question
My
I
head's
have,
swelling.
since this was an unusual fair in running over 2 seasons, sort of like the New York one in 3940, for these private company pavilions, did they have any major changes to their pavilions or exhibits between the 2 seasons, since they did have a couple of months over winter where they could make any adjustments? Thinking especially being private companies, did they say, oh, you know, this was a dud, that we shouldn't have spent all this money? Or did they make any adjustments that, oh, here's something else we didn't get in time for the first edition? that we can get for the second.
Yeah, they made some changes. For the most part, the cost of changing it once the walls were up was kind of prohibitive. I mean, last week we talked, for example, how Chrysler totally changed their paint scheme. They went from a white and blue to a red and purple or orange sort of scheme. And some of these things, they did update the shows. For example, for Ford, they took out all the 64 cars, brought in 65, and then they also redid the narration. In 64, it was Henry Ford Jr. and 65, Walt Disney gave the narration. So the number of them did it, you know, for example, in each of the things, if you were selling some sort of technology, you took out your 1964 toaster ovens and brought in your 65s. I can't think of anything off the top of my head where people said, oh, that was a real mistake. Other than I mentioned, like the Hall of Education just did not come back at all. They just shut down and ripped everything out. Lots of exhibits, you know, in the House of the Better Living Center did not come back, excuse me, between seasons. But for the most part, the things were pretty much set in stone. They did do some things. Another one that changed the show a lot was the Tower of Light. The 64 show and the 65 show had different songs and different entertainment in it, but the basic, you know, pavilion was still the same. You still had Brady Kilowatt and Ben Franklin, but they just try to realize where their shows have been sort of flat. A couple of them, they try to figure out how to improve the capacity of the shows. If we took it, you know, made a little cut here to the film, made a little cut here to the music act, we get more people through it because, again, audiences were just lined up out the door. But pretty much for 64, you got the same show in 65. Now, they did do some additions. 65, they added, I mentioned Fiesta was added. Pennsylvania State Exhibit was added for 65. So there are a couple of things that came in that were all new for 65. And that was part of the draw of trying to get people to come back.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Sure, appreciate you joining us. And all the past ones are on YouTube, so you can catch up on those.
Forward to them.
And let's see, just trying to read a couple comments. Yeah, things like the outside line. You know, you had Progress Land inside and Progress Lane outside. You know, a good marketing thing. And as I mentioned, you know, I actually have a site on my a page on my website, which is worldsfairphotos.com. If you go to the virtual tour, the miscellaneous page, I have an entire page of all the things they changed during the fair. And it's the little things like the paint schemes, or we tore down the snack bar, we built this one here, we put in this, we did that. You know, all sorts of things like Carousel Park was not there when the fair opened, they threw that in. So this Continental Circus was there when it opened, then it wasn't. So yeah, just trying to track all the changes is, and I've got to update it. I don't know if I mentioned on that page about adding the giant lifesaver to the tower or not. There's just so many things as you're going through pictures, you know, looking at them and you realize, hey, that wasn't there. Hey, this is gone. You know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Well, I thank everybody for joining. Glenn, is something else? Oh, you must have muted yourself again. Here, 1 second. You should be able to unmute now. There you go.
Yes, I did. I can't remember when it was, but some years ago we put out a CD set for the New York World's Fair. And if you can get a hold of it, I'm looking at Amazon and it's not available anymore, but it's called Walt Disney and the World's Fair. And it says 1964 in it. It originally was going to be a 1 CD. We found so much material that it ended up being, I think, 5 CDs. And there's a lot of the music that was in, like the Dome show that you were talking about for GE and the Ford Pavilion. So if anybody, maybe this whole group has it already because you're all such fans, but you can find it. I think it's on YouTube as well. You can play it from there.
Yeah,
It's outstanding. I have it.
It's a great set. I helped Stacia Martin with the liner notes for it, and it was just real fun to come back and do it. I think Bruce Gordon worked on that a lot, and
right, Bruce. And that's when, you know, I was able to pull all those tracks from the vault, and we started listening through them, and we realized things like Small World had been recorded in multi-channel, not true stereo, but broken down from the different instruments. And so we pitched that to Disneyland, and they gave us enough money to completely redo the sound system and put new speakers in Small World. So what you hear in there now is 10 times better than it sounded in 1964 and 65.
Well, it's next week. He can lead us in the sing-along for when we get to that one.
Yeah.
Just one second, Davey, right to you. You know, it's interesting when you mentioned that set. I understand, talking to Bruce and Stacia back then, that it almost didn't come to be because of the Ford lawyers. Were you involved in that mess?
I didn't get into the legal things. Mine was more technical and the mixing and editing and stuff like that.
Yeah, because they had the song about, you know, put yourself behind the wheel of a Ford. And, you know, it was a question, did Disney own the rights to that? Did Ford own the rights to it? Did they both own the rights to it? So they had actually finished, you know, an awful lot of the work to get this thing done. And it sat there until they were finally able to work out something between, you know, our lawyers and their lawyers to get it through. But it was almost the World's Fair, Disney at the World's Fair, except Ford.
Yeah. No, I think it's all in there. And
It is now. But I understand it was about a 1-year delay in the project of finally getting it out because of the Ford lawyers. You know, oh, we have a chance to make some money.
Yeah, you put that on eBay. I think they're going for probably a few $100.
Yeah, Michelle's holding one up there. Yeah, it's a great set. Got it in my iPod in the car, and just it comes up all the time. It's great stuff. And some of the outtakes with Walt as he's trying to get things done, and you know, the sanitized outtakes. They didn't stick in all the ones where he was really cursing his head off.
He did, yeah.
I've heard some of those.
He didn't release that.
No, Uncle Walt was having a bad day.
There's a place where he says, you're going to send this back to New York or wherever. And he says, you're going to take all my cussing out, aren't you? And they said, oh, yes, Walt.
1 second, Greg. We'll get to you. Dave?
I just wanted to say that, so one of my jobs was to go down to Disneyland when the sound update happened. And I spent a week in the Small World Pavilion listening to the soundtrack. So if you think it's annoying for a couple times during the day, try that for a week. It's a beautiful song, and I know it. I know all the words and all this.
Well, we had them turn off the pumps, and we'd sit in a scene with a laptop that was interconnected with our big equipment, and we could sit and mix all the different soundtracks. Once we got one done, we'd pull ourselves along and do the next one. So yeah, I knew that song real well. But I tell people, there is a way to get it out of your head, because nobody can get that song out of their head. And I said, just think of the Macarena.
Oh, thanks. Then we got to get that out of our head. I walked into Small World one day on a Monday or Tuesday when the park was closed because I wanted to go see it up close and personal. As you guys know, all sorts of little ladders and pathways through all the scenes and everything. And halfway in there, somebody decided they needed to start doing an audio test. And it was like, you know, as Dave mentioned, being in there and hearing it. By the time I got to that building, I didn't want to hear it for a year. So, Greg, you had something? I saw you had your hand up. You should be able to unmute, Greg. There you go. Greg keeps getting muted and unmuted. Try this one more time, Greg. Okay, you should be able to talk.
I'm trying.
There you go.
My internet is slow, but I think you're probably talking about, if it's got Walt saying naughty things, then it's the unofficial set.
Yeah.
But if anybody who's listening is looking for the official set, I can't check now because my internet is slow, but they sell the unofficial set, at least they did, on the Disney Music Emporium website. So it's still in print, and if that's the case, it's probably still available on Amazon, because that's the one that Randy Thornton and Stacia, and I'm assuming Glenn and everyone else worked on with the book inside.
Right, that's the one. Oh, real quick, somebody mentioned Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow.
If it's gone from there.
Yeah, we'll have to check that. Mention when the Carousel of Progress came to Disneyland, pretty much everything moves intact, including the music. When it moved to Disney World, GE said, we want another song, and that's where it became Now Is the Best Time of Your Life, which was weird, you know, for me when I first went to Disney World and it was the wrong song. It was like, that's not what I remember. And I've mentioned this before. I was at the dinner with the Sherman brothers right after they put the original music back into Florida when they brought Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow back. And they were all excited about being back down there and having the song all done. And this woman came up and started complaining about how Disney had bastardized the ride and put this terrible Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow song in. And what happened to it, so now's the best time of our lives, the real song. And Dick was just like, son of a bitch. They had waited for years to get it back there. They bring it back, and the very first thing was, oh, what did everybody think? I don't like it. So, you know, you can't make them happy. If they do put Tom Hanks in for the narration, there's people thinking that it was always been, you know, Gene Shepard, and how come you're taking him out? So,
Say, Bill, when you say you moved the carousel to Disneyland, did they actually physically move the entire building, or just the mechanics of it?
well, just the mechanics. They tore the building down, took the train track, the wheels, all the figures, and all the rest of that. But no, the building out here is a different building. If you look, that's why it doesn't have the same roof structure, that sort of thing.
And then it went to Florida.
Right, then it went to Florida, and again, a whole new building. Well, we're about at the 2-hour mark. I thank everybody for joining us. Next week will be Industrial Area Part 2. And again, lots of fun stuff. The NCR Pavilion with their concept of water-powered computers and other things that we did not quite get to see. You know, other people having digital switching gates. They thought that they could have water pressure, flipping little switches back and forth, things like that. So appreciate everybody joining. Hope everybody has a great week, and look forward to seeing folks again next Saturday, and hope it's a quiet week for everybody in between.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
Right, take care.
Thanks, Bill. Great job.
Right, thanks. Bye.